Alright, Shalom. I want to give all praise to Yah Bashim Yahushai, Brakathe Yahweh, Brakathe Yahushai. And this is just a quick, I'm going to have this video play after this, but things are moving pretty fast with the Iran situation. The sanctions have been put on them, and they're continuing the missile test. And Trump said that the military option is not off the table. So if the military option is not off the table, they're pretty much showing that war drums are being beaten. That's why if you see the sanction list or the immigrant list of places they stopped from coming in the U.S., the second one on the list was Iran, because that's leading to the war. And let me get this real quick. This is the book of Revelations 11 and 14, and it says, "The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly." So this thing is coming
Military
quick.
exercises get underway in Iran. The Guardians of the Revolution, a branch of the armed forces, say the manoeuvres show Tehran is prepared to confront the threat posed by what are described as humiliating sanctions imposed by the US on Friday. Tehran carried out a missile test on January the 29th. On a visit to Japan, US Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is clear.
This is the single biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. And I think it is wise to make certain that Iran recognizes that what it is doing is getting the attention of a lot of people. And we have a responsibility, along with the rest of the nations that want to maintain stability, to be absolutely clear with Iran in this regard.
Iran says the sanctions are illegal. Officials say they, in turn, will impose legal restrictions on US individuals and entities helping what they describe as regional terrorist groups. Those affected can't access the US financial system or deal with US companies.
And a Fox News alert as President Trump says Iran is playing with fire after a new round of missile tests. Meantime, Iran's Revolutionary Guard says it will launch what it calls roaring missiles upon the United States if its security is threatened. Tensions have been heating up since the U.S. imposed economic sanctions on Iran for ballistic missile tests earlier this week. Those sanctions coming late this week. Jim Walsh, international security expert, joins us now from Boston. Jim, nice to see you, sir. How much of this is the Iranians, and for that matter, the Iranians as a proxy for the Chinese and Russians, testing a new American president?
Well, I think the Iranians are, in this case, are following. They've had a missile program for a really long time, and they are looking at this not from a Chinese or Russian perspective, but from their view in Tehran, from their own defense needs. Now, we may think it's crazy for them to have missiles. I think the fewer the missiles, the better. But the reality is, Iran was a victim of a missile attack. Saddam Hussein launched missiles against Iranian cities during the Iran-Iraq War, and ever since then, not surprisingly, they think they need to have missiles to be able to respond to that sort of threat.
Well, it would be hard, though, to think of them purely as defensive weapons, especially when they have written on them "death to Israel, destroy Israel" on the side of their weapons. That's not exactly defensive in nature, but we've seen over the past couple of weeks the Iranians take more moves, whether it be this suicide attack on a Saudi warship that they thought was possibly an American warship, whether it be their continuing arming of the Houthi rebels inside of Yemen. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem as though the Iranians are backing down at all.
Well, I mean, Iran has, like every country, Iran has alliances. So Iran has an alliance with Syria. I think Assad is a war criminal, so I'm not in favor of Syria, but they have an alliance, so they're going to defend their alliance partner. They are allied with the Houthis in the...
What's the play for this new president now against the Iranians? It's obvious that he doesn't like the Iran deal. President Trump said that a number of times during the campaign. He seems to be sort of backing away a little bit from just tearing it up. But he does seem to be enforcing it and being willing to take on the Iranians in a way President Obama was not.
Well, this whole missile thing is outside of the agreement. That's why, in fact, the U.S. is able to put sanctions on Iran, because though we signed the nuclear agreement, we still retain the right to punish Iran for other sorts of behavior that's not nuclear. I think he is going to enforce the nuclear agreement. That's a good thing, because the only thing worse than Iran with missiles is an Iran with missiles that can build nuclear weapons. So we want to consolidate that victory and make sure they can't go down that path. But if you, Leland, if you step back, what's really driving the politics in that region right now is this intense rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran, between Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran. And as long as they're at each other's throats, competing, you know, like it was the old Cold War days in every country with every proxy, it's going to be tough to keep that, to bring that in. I think if anything, yeah.
You say as long as they were competing, the Sunni-Shia split happened in the late 700s. That doesn't seem to be having a kumbaya moment anytime soon.
Well, that's not exactly the modern origins, because in the old days when there was an Iraq, Saudi Arabia used to balance in favor of against whichever country, either Iran or Iraq, seemed to be getting stronger. So Saudi Arabia actually supported Iran when Saddam invaded Kuwait. But then after the revolution, when Iran looked threatening, Saudi Arabia would balance against that and support Saddam. So there was sort of a balance of power situation that didn't depend on religion. That has changed basically because Iraq has disappeared off the map, and what used to be a balancing game, a three-player balancing game, is now a two-headed knife fight. So anything that can reduce that competition will help the region.
A knife fight that now has intercontinental ballistic missiles, and depending on who you believe, an Iran close to a nuclear weapon. Mr. Walsh, appreciate your insight, sir.
Thank you.
Now, the author of A Single Roll of the Dice, Obama's Diplomacy with Iran. Sharita Parsi is also the president of the National Iranian-American Council. And P.J. Crowley, who used to be Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. He wrote the book, Red Line: American Foreign Policy in a Time of Fractured Politics and Failing States. So President Trump today said that nothing is off the table when asked whether he would consider military action against Iran. PJ, first to you, your reaction to that.
Well, at one level, it is, you know, it more or less mirrors the rhetoric of the Obama administration in the sense that on the one hand, no options are off the table. On the other hand, it did do the nuclear deal, which at least, you know, for the moment, forestalled a military confrontation over Iran's nuclear ambitions. Now, particularly with the Obama administration, you know, it continued to express concerns up until its last day, you know, on Iran's growing influence in the region, as well as having an agreement to disagree over whether missile tests, you know, constitute a violation of the UN, you know, resolution. I mean, it just underscores that you know, notwithstanding the nuclear deal and some of the negative talking points that Mr. Trump used in the campaign, you know, there is still significant friction, you know, between the United States and Iran.
And you have Iran saying, after the White House said it was putting it on notice, that it's going to continue its missile tests. Trita, what is your reaction to that?
Well, I think that is to be expected, and that's the exact danger here. What the Obama administration did is that they first worked extensively to try to establish channels of communications. So in case you end up in a scenario in which you may have to issue a threat, you also have de-escalatory options. The Trump administration has not done the effort to be able to establish those channels. So right now, the two sides are not talking to each other. Instead, they're just issuing these statements and this bluster. And unless you have de-escalatory options, unfortunately, what started off as bluster may end up in a military confrontation.
Right, because PJ does raise the question. The White House says, look, Iran, we're going to put you on notice. Iran says, we're going to continue our testing. Now the White House is saying nothing's off the table, including military action. I mean, where do things go from here?
Well, I think, just to underscore what Trita said, I think that was one of the most significant byproducts of the nuclear negotiation. For the first time in 35 years, you had an authoritative channel between, you know, the United States government, you know, even though it does not have formal diplomatic relations, and representatives of the Iranian government. And that's going to be one of the questions now that we do have Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, is whether you're going to have that channel of communication remain open, just to try to make sure either by design, more likely by misfortune or misreading of actions, where you can at least understand the other side and try to mitigate the potential for an escalatory step.
And I'm curious, I mean, it's no secret that people within the Trump administration have been outspoken against the Iran nuclear deal. In your view, Trita, is what Iran is doing with this testing, is that a violation of the Iran nuclear deal, as we heard from Michael Flynn yesterday?
It is extremely ill-advised what the Iranians did. The timing certainly makes it provocative, but it is not a violation of the UN Security Council resolution. What happened in the negotiations was that the missile issue was actually included originally because of the suspicions that the Iranians had a nuclear weapons program, and as a result, there was an effort to also make sure then that they wouldn't have the delivery systems. Once the nuclear issue got resolved through the nuclear deal, this issue should actually have been automatically eliminated. But because of the way the United States very successfully pressed the Russians and others, they managed to get a consensus to get it included. But the compromise was that the language was very soft. It only calls on the Iranians not to engage in these activities. That's not legally binding, and as a result, it goes against the spirit. It is extremely ill-advised. It is provocative, but it's not a violation, and it's certainly not a cause for war.
Okay, and PJ, I want to ask you about what I was just speaking with Michelle Kaczynski about, this move by the Treasury and reporting that it is easing sanctions. Trump denies that this is, in fact, an easing of any sanctions, but how do you see it? Is this common practice?
Well, I think there is a technical basis behind it. But I think what we're seeing is we could have anticipated the reaction, particularly on Capitol Hill, where there is a clear division between the Trump administration and the rhetoric behind its approach to Russia, and the Congress recognizing that there was Russian interference in the election, and there's certainly an impulse, on the Hill to try to do something about that. So while, yes, on the one hand, there's a technical explanation for it, on the other hand, we see this is yet another example, from President Trump, who refused to at least initially acknowledge, the Russian attempt to influence the election, and now you see kind of a failure to read the signals that it's sending to the rest of the world, whether you're talking about Russian sanctions, whether you're talking about immigrants, or whether you're talking about refugees with Australia. And while it's off to an aggressive start, obviously there's the cost that we're paying in terms of U.S. relations with the rest of the world.